let's get to the serious part. We have Parker up here. Most of you know him. He has a very interesting background. His knowledge spans financial forecasting and the growth side of starting, growing, and restructuring a business. He was recently head of business development at Unchained. Most of you probably know that. And some of you probably saw that he is joining our own Pleb Lab friends at Zaprite. You can follow him at, are you calling this your blog or your newsletter?
Yeah,
Your blog. Follow him at bitcoiner.ghost.io. And I'll repeat that in case this catches on the recording. Bitcoiner.ghost.io. He's got some great posts out there. And here we are with Parker, gradually, and then suddenly, he may be the mayor of Austin. Welcome, Parker.
Thank you, Teresa. And thank you, Carr, all of you guys at Pleb Lab for coming out today. So what I'm going to talk about today, kind of dual purposed, is just my own kind of background or thoughts, experience in terms of how I think about building a startup in the Bitcoin space, but then also talking about it in the application of what I'm working on now, which is Zaprite. And put a post out last week, if a lot of you probably saw it, but for reference, you can go to the Zaprite blog and read that after. But for the past couple of months, I've been working on Zaprite, joining John McGill, who really started Zaprite in Pleb Lab when it was over at Capital Factor, I believe, before he even moved into this space, but then worked out of this space before he went back to Ireland for a bit. But both myself and Will Cole, who also used to be at Unchained, we both stepped back from Unchained late last year. And this really happened by serendipity, I'd say. I was looking to get paid in Bitcoin, and what I wanted to exist didn't, and Zaprite was closest. So I'm going to talk about kind of my philosophy of what I focus on and why, and the heuristics, as well as how that applies to Zaprite, so that it's not just a Zaprite product pitch. So to start the presentation, this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but really Bitcoin is not that complicated. There's very limited things you can do with Bitcoin. You can save it, you can spend it, and you can mine it. And so virtually everything you could possibly build fits in one of those three categories. There's also education, which is incredibly important, but when it comes to if you're a software developer or you're thinking about building a piece of infrastructure, anything that you do is some derivation of these three things. And if you can save it and you can spend it and you can mine it, you can work on custody, you can work on payments, and you can work on mining. But within each of those things, there's a massive landscape. I think like the idea of payments, people oftentimes throw it around as a loose term, but when you start to think about all the different ways that people pay for things, there are any number of verticals, hardware, software, but then types of payments. So I'll talk a little bit about that in the context of Zaprite. But these are the heuristics that I follow. It's when I joined Unchained, what I thought about. When I joined Zaprite, it's what I thought about. It's what do I need? Because I think a lot of times people try to forecast what others need, but in Bitcoin, because it's so early, it's like there's something that you need that you don't have, and to think about yourself first and foremost. But to start with, what do I need? And then is there a service that offers what I need? So when I got into working with Zaprite, I first went around and looked and said, is there something that would satisfy my need? And not just in a way that is disingenuous, that's like biased towards, well, it's not exactly right, but it would work for me. But it's like, is what I actually need at a fundamental level, is it out there or not? Because if it is out there, like, try to use it. And just because it's out there, if it's not satisfactory, doesn't mean you shouldn't start your own business. Then do other people need this? Because there might be things that are so specific to you that you're like, okay, I need this, but I'm some weird niche thing that nobody else is going to need. And so building a business around that wouldn't make sense. Would I pay for it? A critical one, would I pay for it? Would other people pay for it? And then maybe the most important one, though, to complete is would other people pay for it now? Because the now speaks to timing of like, hey, there's going to be a lot of things that people need in Bitcoin, but if I build something too early, I'm not going to have product market fit because people not only, people might pay for it in 5 or 10 years, but if they're not willing to pay for it now, then I've moved too early. There's not a sufficient enough market to cause my business to be sustainable. So the background, which I mentioned a little bit about in terms of me joining Zaprite, was actually when I wanted to go put a post on my blog. What I wanted to exist to be able to receive Bitcoin payments didn't exist. And so what people would oftentimes say is, well, what about BTC Pay? It's like, well, I was very familiar with BTC Pay. I've run a BTC Pay server. In fact, on my blog right now, I'm running a BTC Pay server because I haven't moved over to Zaprite just yet. But what Zaprite had, and I'll get into it, was the closest to what I thought should have existed. And it checked one of the big boxes. It fit in that payment vertical of working on Bitcoin. And what ultimately I wanted was a hosted service that enabled Bitcoin payments where I could basically drop my XPub in and somebody else run a server. So what I was looking for that didn't exist was Bitcoin payment enablement without having to run a server, but being able to do that in a non-custodial way. I wanted to basically have somebody be able to come to a website and pay for somebody. It go directly to me, but I just wanted to focus on running my blog. And when you project this out to any number of people, it is anybody who's running a business. There's some people who are going to want to run a BTC Pay server. There's some people who are going to want to work with a custodian and have a custodial experience like a BitPay or an OpenNode. But the majority of Bitcoiners in my mind were more like myself, which is they wanted non-custodial payments, and they also, as they're focused on running their business, they're not necessarily wanting to run a server. I'm capable of running a server. I've run a BTC Pay on, now Justin Moon helped me do it, but it was a Mac running a Windows, running a Docker station, and basically was something that I was technically capable of doing, but would drop constantly, was exposing my IP address at my residence, something that I didn't want. So that was really the background. And if I come back to the things, it's like, I needed this. Did I think other people needed it? Yes. Did I think people would pay for it? I would have paid for it. And clearly we're at a point in Bitcoin, I don't want to say clearly, but for the people that are, I'd say, that have a pulse on it, recognize that there's more and more people that are starting to say, pay me in Bitcoin. And so that the time is also now. So now what is Zaprite? Zaprite is a Bitcoin payments company. I think oftentimes when people talk about payments in Bitcoin, they think that that is synonymous with Lightning. But in the context of Zaprite, payments is not code for Lightning. Lightning is a rail just as on-chain is a rail. Payments is also not a catch-all to describe every movement of Bitcoin. I think when people say, I'm working on payments, and this is to go back to this slide of like, if you think in one vertical of what we're working on and then what the range of other things that you might work on if you're interested in the payment space in Bitcoin, is we're specifically focused on two types of payments. Business invoicing, so that could be a podcaster who's invoicing a company for their advertising reads, or it could be a lawyer invoicing a Bitcoiner for legal fees, or it could be accounting services like Satoshi Pacquioli wanting to be paid in Bitcoin, issuing a company that they're doing work for with a business invoice. The other side is e-commerce, so payment links, basically somebody selling a good or service. The reason why we focus on these two is because the payment experience is virtually the same. There's different software that sits on the top, but somebody is either in a browser or on a mobile phone needing to grab a Bitcoin address and an amount. And that's distinguished from something like a point of sale system and when I think about, kind of this application of payments, if you think about it, like oil is going to be settled in Bitcoin, real estate is going to be settled in Bitcoin. Those two types of transactions are each incredibly unique, which is different from an e-commerce transaction, which is different from point of sale. So I think that when, specifically in the vertical of payments, if you were thinking about something, it is like being narrowly focused and knowing what problem you're actually solving. In our context, and when I was setting out to solve my own problems, I want to receive Bitcoin payments on my blog. Now, that as a market for people to pay for a service, a software service, probably not a lot of bloggers that are going to support a business by paying for a SaaS service. But it was actually more broader than that. It was how many businesses want to receive Bitcoin payments online, and is the solution out there the solution that will solve the problem for the widest number of those? So this is a quick look at the UI, but when we talk about it, and really I'll get to what differentiates Zaprite, it is you bring your own wallet. But you can bring a custodial wallet or you can bring a non-custodial wallet, which is something that might distinguish it from a BTC Pay. But then also, because you can bring a non-custodial wallet, like dropping in an XPub or connecting an Unchained vault, you can support on-chain non-custodial payments in a much easier way. But you can also mix and match. You can basically have a non-custodial payment for on-chain payments and then have connect like a Strike account, or in the future you'll be able to put an LN address. So basically this idea of pairing on-chain non-custodial with custodial Lightning. But you can, in the middle you see an invoice, a business invoice. On the right side, an example of a payment link if you were going to sell like a hot desk. So what differentiates Zaprite? We're a hosted solution. We're wallet agnostic. Bring your own wallet. We support on-chain and Lightning, self-custody and custodial, single sig and multi-sig. We focus on self-custody, and this is where also it's a heuristic. It's not just about Zaprite. Whenever I focused, this applied at Unchained as well, some people would say that we were crazy for trying to build a non-custodial collaborative custody platform. Holding keys is so hard. Well, everybody who's a Bitcoiner ultimately ends up holding their own keys, and so the question is why? But it's also, there's a first principle as to why. And even though holding private keys might be uncomfortable, it's the only way to guarantee that somebody else doesn't screw you. It's the only way to eliminate counterparty risk. So if every Bitcoiner ends up at that point, that means that the majority of the people that have enough Bitcoin to be able to pay for financial services, or realistically that are going to take their Bitcoin custody seriously, we're going to hold their own keys. In the context of Zaprite, the heuristic or analog is that the people who want to receive Bitcoin payments today are Bitcoiners. Bitcoiners want to hold their own keys, which is why we focus non-custodially. Like the problem I was literally trying to solve for myself was non-custodial payments without running a server. Bitcoin keys, and there's been a lot of discussion about this, more recently, but it's like, keys are really easy. Like I was trying to get a form set up on my blog as a non-technical user, like that was complicated. Holding and securing a Bitcoin key, very easy. Running a server, not as easy as some software developers would like to think. And so what we ultimately provide is one checkout for both Bitcoin and fiat rails. That's also something that is, I think, something that John keyed in on very early at Zaprite, was that any company that wants to move to a Bitcoin standard still needs to receive fiat. Very few businesses that want to receive Bitcoin are in a position to suddenly say, and if you want to pay me fiat, sorry, you can't be a customer of mine. So Zaprite offers both of those two things. And what we really do is we specialize in the payments experience. We make it possible for you to basically receive Bitcoin however and wherever you want it to go. Critically, what I mentioned there, or forgot to mention, was that you can also sign up with just an email. One of the things, and this was a heuristic at Unchained, by helping our clients hold their own keys, I never put my head on the pillow worried that I was going to lose somebody else's money. Kind of by a collaborative custody approach at Unchained, we were able to enable more people to hold their own keys that maybe otherwise would, but they were ultimately accountable. They could make a number of mistakes. We could be there to help them, but we were not a single point of failure. We were not a place where we were not a honeypot. In the context of Zaprite, the analog is there's no easy withdrawals because we never touch customers' money. But what that also means is that our business becomes a lot more simple in different ways, which is because we're not touching people's money, we're not a payment processor. Because we're not a payment processor, we don't do KYC. Now, we do, part of that's because we respect privacy, but it's actually driven at a more fundamental level. We want to enable Bitcoin payments, and in order to enable Bitcoin payments, it actually complicates the situation if the money routes through us. And if somebody is, setting aside, if somebody's, wants to work with a custodian like River or Cash App, we can connect their accounts. Now that's not available today, but a Strike account is. So the point is to focus on the payment experience, like really focusing in on your business, what problem you're solving, and then what is the most efficient path to do that? Because in our world, it was the Bitcoiners actually want the Bitcoin to go directly to them. And if we deliver it in that way without the money routing through us, we simplify our business so we can do it at lower cost, and we can put our heads on the pillow at night not being worried about this massive security problem of, are we going to lose our customer funds? Now, we do still have a security dilemma, which is when a customer needs an address shown that somebody hasn't spoofed an address, but the problem of custody is significantly, it is eliminated via our platform. So I'm going to jump ahead. This is a key one, and this is really my personal advice for anybody thinking about starting a business in Bitcoin. I don't know how many of you guys have listened or watched the movie Friday Night Lights, but there's this idea of clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose. That, I think like when I've talked about this idea of Zaprite or why I'm working on it, a lot of people will say, well, doesn't BTC Pay exist? And then they'll say, well, can't you use OpenNote or BitPay? It's like, look, if what I wanted existed, I wouldn't be working on Zaprite. But another side of that is that the quality of what you're delivering and the conviction in it, that like you see something that somebody else doesn't see as a need, that there's this realization or recognition that you actually have to put the product out there for them to get what is different about it, right? Like some people might have said, and many people did, when we were, launching collaborative custody at Unchained, that Casa existed. It's like, one, there's this like inherent limitation of like, Bitcoin's going to disrupt the entire world. Everyone's going to use Bitcoin. There's going to be 8 billion people using Bitcoin. So if anybody thinks that there's going to be one of something, you've chosen the wrong market. Like full stop. Plus, if people don't start to copy you, you've also probably chosen something wrong. But that when I looked at the world, I said BTC Pay doesn't actually solve my problem, and there is a big difference between running a server and receiving non-custodial payments and being a payment processor yourself, which is right for certain people, or on the other end of the extreme, working with a full payment processor, certain people that solves a problem for. But if I wanted to receive non-custodial payments without running a server, that did not exist. And I looked at the market and said, I think this is probably the majority of the market. The majority of the market are probably the people like me, people who can deal with private keys, but people who are not software engineers. And that if you have that mindset where people say, but doesn't X, Y, Z already exist? It's like, if you have vision as a founder or to build something, if you apply those heuristics, that people might think from the surface that things look the same, but if like many of you have probably used Unchained and Casa. The only thing that is the same about those two businesses is the word collaborative custody. The idea that you're using multisig and that another party has a key. If you look at the applications from the color to the product to, from one to the other versus the services that they stack next to each other, they couldn't be more different. So like, and then the idea to be like, well, will there only be one Casa or will there only be one Unchained? It's like, no, there's probably going to be, hundreds at the end of the day. This is Bitcoin. The big question is, am I too early? Or is there a sufficient end market? But just reinforcing to you guys that like most people don't understand the problems of Bitcoiners as well as Bitcoiners do. And if you are thinking about a problem that you're diagnosing for yourself and being honest with yourself, because a lot of people might answer those questions and be like, oh, what I need actually does exist, and set out to like, have be anchored to their idea rather than the problem they solve. But I think in more cases, it's true that there's a lot of things that don't exist in Bitcoin that might appear to be tangentially out there, but not solving the problem that you actually want. And just to be reinforced to like go out and solve it. And if you deliver the right solution, people will adopt it. Another heuristic that doesn't, applies to Zaprite, but I think it should apply to a lot of things, is to build for Bitcoiners. Like if you try to build for people who do not yet understand Bitcoin, it doesn't mean that easy buy and sell functions aren't valuable. But my philosophy is like there's 19.4 million Bitcoin out there circulating. you need to be able to deliver a service that those people will take and pay for. And the majority of that 19.4 million Bitcoin are people that have bought it 4 years ago or earlier, right? And so if you focus on the Bitcoiner as an end customer, like if we were focusing on how can we bring payments to the most people possible, we would have built something entirely different. But because we recognize that Bitcoiners are the ones who actually want the payments, and that when people want the payments, they are going to be Bitcoiners, that we would be building the wrong application if we were building for somebody who does not yet know why Bitcoin stores value, and we hope for them to understand that in the future. We're delivering a self-custody solution to be able to receive Bitcoin payments for people who do not want to run the server themselves, and that is tailored to Bitcoiners. The majority of them are not software developers. So if you just focus on execution and know what problem you're solving, and focus on the first principles of what does a Bitcoiner need, and the way I think about it is like, if there's a Bitcoiner today, there's going to be 10x in the future. But if you built the application that doesn't solve the problem the Bitcoiner needs, it's probably temporary. It's probably going to go away. I'm going to skip over that. This is the last heuristic that I think about with Zaprite. It's that if we build the right solution, if we're right about the application, that the idea that people want non-custodial payments but don't want to run a server, that 10x, 100x, 1000x the number of people that would otherwise receive Bitcoin payments that aren't today will. And that there's this recognition that if you put the right solution out there, people will use it. And that in Bitcoin particularly, you actually have to deliver the solutions in order for people to adopt it. Like, people couldn't use collaborative custody before collaborative custody existed, right? People couldn't receive payments in a non-custodial way without running a server if that solution exists. That in Bitcoin versus something in the legacy world, you have to actually deliver the product to find out whether the market's there, but you also better be damn sure the market's there, because starting and running a business is difficult. And then this is another heuristic: making something easy and more people will do it. You want people to pay you for a service, make it really easy for people to pay you for a service. You know, one of the, I was talking about, I can't remember who, someone over at the Commons, we were talking about how the heuristic that I think Jeff Bezos had at Amazon was, not only was it like focusing, like laser focus on solving a customer problem and being like, what problem am I solving and am I doing this well? But it was make it really easy to return things. And like you could read that heuristic as make it really easy to return things and people will return things. But it's more make it really easy to return things and people will buy more things. That like reducing that friction. And so in this case, it's like if you make something easy to do, more people will do it. And in our case, it's like it is really easy to create a website, go sign up for Zaprite with an email address, drop in an XPub, connect a Lightning account you already have, and start receiving Bitcoin payments. Running a server and the mental burden of that, and this is what I think that most Bitcoiners do that are non-technical, and here this might be a highly technical crowd, but if you're projecting out towards the universe of Bitcoiner that you're solving a problem for, it's, well, okay, I want to receive payments on my blog, but I don't want to run a server. It's like, okay, go to BTC Pay. Oh, but I don't want to run a server. Okay, go to OpenNode, but then I got to do KYC. You know what? I'm not going to receive Bitcoin payments. You know, so the idea being that if you deliver, and again, that's specific to Zaprite, but if you use the heuristic of like, hey, what do I want? And if I make it easier, then the market will, you know, increase by 10x or 100x, or maybe it will exist where it didn't exist before. So just, you know, carrying that philosophy of make something easy and more people will do it. And then in the context of Zaprite, it's like, you know, today a lot of Bitcoiners do not receive Bitcoin payments. And so when we're thinking about the problem, the first bridge to cross is like get Bitcoiners receiving Bitcoin payments. Don't focus on the guy down the street that has a sandwich shop that has no idea why Bitcoin stores value. Because right now, probably if fewer than 1 out of 100 people get Bitcoin, probably fewer than 1 out of 100 Bitcoiners accept Bitcoin payments. So if we can't solve a problem for Bitcoiners, then we're certainly not going to solve a problem for the people that do not yet get Bitcoin. And this idea that's like, hey, you got to build these tools before people critically need them, because if you're waiting to build the tools, to scramble to build the tools when like everything's chaotic and the world's hyperinflating, you've waited too long. So it's kind of a confluence of, you got to build the tools to establish that the market is there, but you have to have a really good, kind of assessment of what people actually need. But you also have to have a little bit of faith that if I build this, then people will come. And, kind of operating with that heuristic of this is a necessity. Like, we need these tools because, if we don't have them, or if we don't have the comfort to be able to develop them when we don't need them, then developing them when it's, absolutely critical, it's going to be actually a lot harder to deliver the solution. So, that's kind of a kind of full scope of why we're working on Zaprite and how we think about, building a startup, kind of from a heuristic standpoint, but also in the application of Zaprite. So if you are interested in receiving Bitcoin payments, if a non-custodial setup without running a server and Simplify, where we focus on your payment experience, let us know. But then also, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer a few now, or you can find me later and I can talk more about it, how it might apply to a business idea that you're thinking about in the Bitcoin space.
What was it like? How did you see that right away? And just talk about how you're able to clearly define the product so well.
So I think it really comes down to having a clear definition around what problem you're solving. And I saw somebody else put it on Twitter, and I'd provide attribution if I could remember who said it, but that it was that too often people fall in love with their idea and lose focus on the problem that they're intending to solve and who their customer is. And I'll use an example where I kind of have to remind myself in the context of Zaprite that when I just kind of carte blanche say what problem is Zaprite solving, helping small to medium-sized businesses receive Bitcoin payments with a focus on business invoicing and e-commerce, and that there's a significant overlap between these two, because it's like we can't have two different customers. We can't have two customers at the same time, which are, like when I think about who am I building for, if I'm a startup and I have two, think about the Bitcoiner and then the person who doesn't know anything that they're doing. If I try to solve both those problems at the same time, it's going to be really difficult to do. But then it also focuses in on, okay, what if those are my people, what do I need to deliver for them? And part of it is the receiving side, part of it is the business and accounting tools, but where I can make trade-offs and priorities, if I'm clearly focused on who my customer is and what the problem is that I'm solving, it makes product priorities and strategies a lot simpler, and it also kind of takes the weight off of having to be all things to all people. And one of the examples is, and it was part of when Will and I were tinkering around with Zaprite before we joined, but the thing that connected for us, that told us that Zaprite was the closest, was the signaling for, he had something in his connections tab that said, XPub support coming, but then also this idea that you could connect any wallet, and that Bitcoiners, if they're using Trezor Ledger Cold Card, if they're using an LND node or whatever Lightning implementation, that if we're solving a problem for Bitcoiners, this idea that bring your own wallet, we need to be able to support Casa, we need to be able to support Unchained, we need to be able to support a Sparrow user, right? Because all of those fit under this idea that we're solving a payment problem for Bitcoiners that don't want to run a server. But the idea of if we had fallen in love with our idea, it would be this idea that the connections was the thing that was important, to be able to connect as many wallets into it as possible, rather than the problem that we're solving is enabling non-custodial payments for Bitcoiners without running a server, and then what are the things that they are going to need? Because a lot of Bitcoiners, especially if they have the idea they want to receive Bitcoin payments and they want to have success quickly, it is setting up a private key that they already have with an XPub, and then connecting a custodial Lightning wallet like a Strike, and then coming back in later and figuring out their non-custodial Lightning implementation. So us supporting custodial payments is not necessarily a signal that we're, just as high of a priority on people that aren't going to hold their own keys. It's solving the Lightning side of the equation for thinking about a small to medium-sized business that's run by a Bitcoiner that wants to receive Bitcoin payments, but might shut down if they realize, you know what, I need to receive Lightning payments, but I have no idea how to run a Lightning node, and I have no idea how to manage channels. And that's why I had this, kind of comment from Odell up here where he says the mental burden of using Lightning in a sovereign way is exhausting compared to on-chain Bitcoin. Managing Lightning nodes makes me appreciate Bitcoin so much more. We recognize that most of the value that's transacted happens on-chain, but that Bitcoiners naturally need to be set up to receive Lightning payments, but they will shut down, especially non-technical ones, which are 9 out of 10 Bitcoiners. If you're a software developer, you just have to accept that. That the custodial application is important even to a Bitcoiner, especially to have success in receiving Lightning payments. So, Carr, that was a long-winded way, but it was like,
that's probably why you're able to.
Yeah.
So that's weird. That's interesting, though. You saw the connections, and that was the first thing that, just manifested. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Any other questions?
Just real quick, you're enabling people to accept Lightning, but I mean that is custodial by nature, right? So you're offering Lightning non-custodial, uncustodial. How do you achieve that?
So somebody could, as an example, could connect a LND node that's non-custodial.
Okay, so that is a node they would have to run.
Yeah. So if like as an example, if a Bitcoiner was technically proficient and did not want to receive Lightning payments with to a custodial account, they could run their own node and connect an LND. It might be hosted on something like a Luna, so they might not be self-hosting the Lightning node, but they could be running a completely non-custodial Lightning implementation and just connect the node to Zaprite. And then, as an example, the way it would work is when somebody clicked on Lightning, it would go directly route through their own node controlled by their own keys. And then also, like what we'd envision, and so today you could connect an LND node. What we'd also envision is, I think there will be increasing applications like Blockstream's, what's their Greenlight, where they're running the node, but you have the keys, or something similar to Mutiny, where you have the keys, but somebody else is helping manage the channels and the routing. That I think those are keying in on like similar simplification problems that we are, where it's like, okay, most people want to control their wealth, but they do need support on these technical aspects of Bitcoin. And if we can ensure the most critical aspect of it being that, it's a huge problem. If the person who's processing your payment has the leverage over you that they have control of your wealth, that if we can just reduce that as a barrier to say we help get the payments go directly where you want. And then in our philosophy, it's if somebody wants to get set up to receive custodial Lightning payments, like thinking like, I need to do something for this weekend, I need to get set up quickly. Okay, let me do that for now, and I can come back in later and connect a Lightning channel. Or if I'm, being realistic, maybe 95% of the payments I'm taking are going, if I'm paying for like a PlebLab $300, membership, that might be an on-chain payment, but if I'm paying for coffee, it might be $3 and I'll pay Lightning. The majority of payments today are still on-chain, and I think that's another thing that we keyed in on, that I think people look right past on-chain payments, and on-chain payments are beautiful. Like, there is still not enough economic activity on Bitcoin. Like, there's dollar transaction fee. Anybody who's issuing a business invoice at the end of the month, or a contractor, that's an on-chain payment, but everyone just goes to Lightning for payments. And so it's really just kind of focusing in on, kind of providing the tools that we think the widest range of Bitcoiners are going to need, and that isn't just LND plus an XPub.
So I'm an app developer, and I can use like Google Play payments, I can use Apple payments, and they have kind of monopoly restrictions for me to use those. Let's say that those restrictions weren't there. Could I use Zaprite to build payments into my app for kind of one-off payments or subscriptions or things like that? Is it set up for that, or is that maybe not a use case yet?
So today it would basically be, you could basically this on the right here, what we have, you could have a payment link that would basically link out to something that's hosted at Zaprite. One of the things that we will begin to work on is integrations. So it depends on if it's kind of, you know, whether it's a Shopify store or a WooCommerce store, or if it's a WordPress store. Like the next thing that will come will be more seamless integration, so that at the point of checkout, like if you have a store, that where we'll likely, or not where we'll likely, where we will get to is basically when someone goes to pay, the actual payment method will be connected to Zaprite, but your store will continue to be what you're currently running. So it depends on the complexity of your store, basically. Like if you're selling single items and you just need a payment link to say like, I want to sell this for $400 or $500 or $100 or $50, Zaprite can do that, and you can put a button on your page and you can receive dollars by connecting a Stripe account, you know, a Lightning implementation, and an on-chain wallet. In the future, there will just be tighter integrations with other e-commerce platforms. All
Thank
right.
you. I think that's it.
Yeah, come find
Thank
me.
you, Parker
later.
Lewis.